Hi, I'm Sherry, and this is Sherry on Books for allgoodbooks.com. Today's subject is the Harvard Classics. In about 1908, the president of Harvard University, whose name was Dr. Charles W. Eliot, had been the president for 40 years and was considered one of the finest educators and scholars of his time. And he had been talking about how he believed he could put together a 3-foot shelf of books that would give the reader the equivalent of a liberal arts education. I thought, well, what is a liberal arts education? So I looked it up in the dictionary. It was dictionary.com. And it gave me the political definition, but I knew that wasn't what he meant. So I went back in and I found another dictionary, which was the Merriam-Webster's dictionary. And in that, it was described as, well, let me just read it for you. Liberal arts education, college or university studies such as language, philosophy, literature, and abstract science, intended to provide chiefly general knowledge and to develop general intellectual capacities such as reason and judgment, as opposed to professional or vocational skills, such as being a medical doctor or an engineer. So it wasn't going to teach you that. So be careful what you're getting online in the internet, because that information is modified and not always reliable. I suggest getting an old-fashioned hardcover copy of the book and going from there. So while he was at one of his speaking engagements, P.F. Collier and Sons, which is a publishing company, and they produced a lot of magazines at the time as well, approached him and said, well, why don't you do that? Come up with a 5-foot shelf of books, a list of those books that you believe could be equivalent to a liberal arts degree from Harvard University, and we will publish it. And he thought about it. And he went to the Harvard College and the new president of the university and to the alumni and said, well, what do you think about this? I thought, well, that's a good idea. Why don't you do it? Be a great thing. Help a lot of people who couldn't afford to get the education otherwise. And so he started working on it. He had a lot of collaborators. He didn't do it by himself. And together they came up with a list of 50 books. The books there were so many of them. These were not created for the Harvard Classics. These were classics that he chose to be a part of the Harvard Classics to get the education. So were these the best books of their time? Not necessarily. What he really wanted to do it would provide a world view, a world understanding of the development of man through time. And that was the progress of man for the last 6,000 years, including the Bible, observing, recording, inventing, imagining from the earliest of historical times. And like I said, that included the Bible. The Bible is not a part of the Harvard Classics because Dr. Eliot believed that every household had their own Bible, so why would they buy one for the set? But it was considered a part of the Harvard Classics. So dating back from the earliest period, which book 1 should of course be the Bible, and then going on through the other 50 books of the Harvard Classic, then you would recognize a liberal arts degree from Harvard by 1909, 1910 standards. That's not something to be taken lightly. This was a big brag, and he had to live up to it. So could he do it? Well, they put the list of books together, and there were 50 books, and they put it through committee. They went through several committees, and they found the things that were most likely going to go in it. And basically his, like I said, his goal was to record the stream of world thought that would enrich, fertilize, and refine the mind of the reader, to teach the reader how to think, not what to think. So it was the journey of humankind, and like I said, it was going to stretch through 6,000 years of recorded history. Book 51 was later added, and it included some of the great lectures. And then book 52 was added after that, and it contained something that I've always found fascinating, and it was how to get the equivalent of a liberal arts degree from Harvard by 1909 standards. It was the real thing, and a tough thing, because it was not to be taken lightly. So basically, he said, of this 50 book set, if you read 15 minutes a day, that you could have the equivalent of this degree at the end of a year, which seems pretty spectacular. Many of us have, through high school, probably read a lot of these books already. Now, there are 52 books, but of those 52, I recognized a bunch that I had read in high school. Don Quixote, Pilgrim's Progress, The 1001 Nights, Homer's The Odyssey. Now, you may not have read those books, but if you look at the whole list, I bet there's some that you have read. And when you were reading it on the high school or even the college level and you were forced to read it, it was drudgery. But now, all these years later, with your own education, high school or college, whatever it may be, as you look at and read those books again, it takes on a whole new dimension. They're more pleasant reading. I would recommend you start. Now, in 1909 and 1910, they started publishing first edition books, and they were only able to publish like 25 of the first edition books. And then in 1910, they published the second portion of those books. So if you have first edition books, you're probably seeing the two different dates and wondering if they're both first edition. They are. Starting with book probably 26, you'll see 1910 on the published date. They published by 1930 500,000 editions of those books and put them into households. 500,000. As people downsize, the books are lost. Sometimes they're thrown away. Sometimes they're given to others, family members, and they don't know the value of the books. To the recipient, it's just an old book. But one of the things that has happened to me when I was, I had a used bookstore a while back, and a professor came in from the local university, a retired professor, and he asked me if I would be interested in some used books. And of course, this was a used bookstore, so of course I would be interested. I said, okay, how old are they? And he said, well, between 100 and some 200-year-old books. Well, what am I going to do? I don't know anything about them. So why don't you just bring me one box? And he was so upset. He said, I'm just going to take the whole thing and just dump them all in the dump. Because I'd promised those books to professors. They promised they were interested in them. I'm going into a nursing home or assisted living. I don't have room for all these books. So I'm just going to take them to the dump. And I said, well, just bring me a box of those books and I'll take a look at them. And so he brought me 2 or 3 boxes, and I took a look at them, and boy, they stunk. They really smelled bad. And so I thought, okay, this isn't going to work. And about that time, a friend came in and she said, oh, I've got an idea that'll fix this. Okay. So she brought in some equipment that helped me remediate the problem. And so I started reviewing the books, and none of them were on Amazon. Not none of them. A lot of them weren't on Amazon. They were so scarce, so rare, they were not even on Amazon. A lot of them were first editions. Some of them were signed, and the thing that was so strange and interesting was that we had found through this fine professor, Dr. Freitag, these wonderful first edition signed books. And I just think if I had not accepted those books, where would they be right now? If you can't afford to find a beautiful set of Harvard classics, there are paperback versions, and there are versions that have been printed by other publishers that are not part of the set, and they're fine too. It's the same book.